Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tristan Claridge, and it's a pleasure to be here with you as part of our ongoing webinar series. Since 2020, these sessions have been a place where ideas meet practice, where researchers, practitioners, and curious thinkers gather to explore what social capital means, why it matters, and how we can put it to work in the world. At the International Social Capital Association, we're committed to growing understanding and action around social capital. We do that through conversations like this one, by learning together, challenging assumptions, and building the very relationships that we're here to talk about. If you find value in these conversations and want to stay connected, we'd love you to join the community and perhaps attend our conference in Dubai next year. We're honored to be joined today by Michael Wright for a presentation about weaving webs of relationships, supporting youth success through social capital. As a senior learning experience manager at the Search Institute, Michael helps ensure that the organization's work translates into clear, engaging, and memorable learning experiences. The Search Institute has been a leading force in bringing social capital into youth development practice, most notably through its applied research on developmental relationships, its national studies on how young people access and mobilize social resources, and its practical tools that help schools and youth-serving organizations to strengthen networks that support young people's success. Michael brings deep institutional design expertise from higher education, where he has taught composition, communication, and the humanities, and he's led communications and editorial work for education and arts-focused organizations. With a background in making complex ideas accessible, he approaches learning design and communication as acts of thoughtful curation. Welcome, Michael. It's great that you can join us, and over to you for the presentation.
Thank you so much, Tristan, and to the association, and for all of you on this call, and for all of you watching on YouTube now and later. It's a real honor to spend some time with you and kind of think together on what social capital, the concepts and research around social capital might mean, especially for youth development. Excited to spend this time with you. It'll probably talks probably about an hour-ish, and we'll hopefully have time for some interaction for those of you who are on the call live today in December. Weaving webs of relationships, supporting youth success through social capital. So that's today we're going to be talking specifically about, like Tristan said, what can we learn from social capital as it relates to youth development in particular? And there's a few more introduction things, and we will just dive right into this content. So Search Institute partners with organizations to cultivate the strengths, relationships, and opportunities necessary for young people to learn and grow, contribute, and thrive. In our call today, one way to translate that is that we partner with organizations to build the social capital of youth so that they can learn, grow, contribute, and thrive. I like to say that although positive youth development is critical to our work, our bread and butter, our daily work is actually positive adult development. We work directly with adults and organizations who care about young people and try to help make their work more effective. So yes, my name is Michael, and I am honored to be talking to you all today at Search Institute. I put my background into designing workshops and resources and kind of helping our team stand between research and practice and design materials and learning experiences for adults who work with young people. More recently, we've been looking at systems level work and systems level training programs. It's been a real delight and interesting challenge to think about how to deploy multi-year long systems level training for national organizations who work with young people. And I bring to this call, although I do not have specific training in social capital, I have trained hundreds of leaders working in youth development and a personal interest in social capital, as well as a desire to share with you all the kinds of things we're learning at Search Institute over the past couple of years on this topic. Many of you I know will have a lot of research and concepts and theories that back up this topic of social capital, and I hope that you bring that to the conversation. I hope that something that we share today can inspire some thoughts for you and that you share in the chat. And we kind of together collectively bridge that gap between research science, practitioner wisdom, youth voice. It's kind of where Search Institute is situated, and that's kind of where we are situated today on this call. So, welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking some time out of your Wednesday to think together about social capital and youth development. Social capital at Search Institute is a fairly new topic, although if you look back in our research, the kind of focus on aligning different sectors through shared work and especially building assets of young people, there is social capital woven through that, even though the term might not be as explicit. In the past couple of years, we've started focused more explicitly on what is social capital, what does it mean, how can we use these theories and concepts to help adults who work with young people, and specifically what that's looked like over the past couple of years is developing our own social capital measures. In 2021, we have multiple surveys where we help organizations kind of get a pulse on what youth are experiencing. And we've been developing measures specific to social capital, especially through K through 12. We did a project with Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, positioning mentors as social capital builders, looking at how mentors and youth can build relationships with each other, especially across lines of racial, ethnic identity. More recently, we developed a multi-year project, Social Capital Tools Project, that ended up and concluded with the Youth Opportunity Navigator, which is an online data-driven portal to help organizations as they're going on their own improvement journey and building social capital of young people. I'll share more about that later in the talk today. So a lot of this is, like I said, is like rooted in research we've done in the past. You can kind of see the threads of social capital there. And I personally and other staff at Search as well, we are very excited and that these things are now, we're kind of naming them as social capital and being more explicit and doing research that helps us understand how relationships work, not just at the dyadic level, the kind of one-to-one level, but at the ecological level. We have a lot of other resources on as well on our website that recommend that you take a look at searchinstitute.org. So in our time today, what we want to do is develop a shared understanding of social capital as it relates to young people, and then look at some practical strategies for supporting young people as they build their own web of relationships. And finally, consider a couple of organizations and their current practices that they use to build social capital. Social capital is a term we know, and hopefully at the end of this session, you'll have a greater sense of like how that specific term applies in this specific sector of youth development. And so we'll have time to discuss questions, and I hope that you have them because I'd love to hear more from you all after the presentation. So when we talk about social capital, we are expanding from that dyadic relationship to the relational ecosystem. So, developmental psychologist Bronfenbrenner, his ecological systems theory, where people are situated in micro ecosystems at the small individual level, all the way to macro ecosystems like larger social structures. Relationships at Search Institute is something we've been studying for a while, and we have really become focused on emphasizing that they do not happen in a vacuum. They happen in a specific place, in an ecosystem among a variety of different kinds of relationships, different sectors, different institutions, different languages, different missions and visions and values. So how do we align different people and different groups on that shared vision of helping young people thrive? A quote that I came across and put together for the presentation: effective community organizations provide particular relational resources that foster links across an otherwise often unbridgeable gulf between youth and society's institutions. So, social capital within the context of youth development is all about building and leveraging relationships with and for young people as they navigate social institutions around them. And I think that's a kind of a unique aspect of social capital in youth development is that we are deeply focused on building social capital for others on behalf of others. It has a different focus where I might want to build my own social capital in like arts world in the Twin Cities or something where I'm calling from today. That's different than like building social capital on behalf of someone else. And I think that you'll see that DNA woven through the whole talk. So as we kind of dive into this talk today, curious about who helped you navigate social structures as you were growing up. It's worth just kind of in youth development and any kind of helping profession to start by first naming, like, you know what, like I am here doing this work because of people who have shaped me in the past. So who helped you navigate those social structures as you were growing up? I encourage you to share that in the chat or write a comment on YouTube. For me, the first people that came to mind were definitely my parents. I was not a sporty person. I played baseball for a single season, didn't go super well. And as that kind of unfolded, my parents were like, okay, we need to help him. And they put me in an acting class, put me in a music class, magic classes, a paper making class. I was getting a lot of exposure to a lot of different sectors and meeting a lot of other peers interested in these different art forms and engaging different adults who are helping and teaching those different art forms. And I look back at that time like, oh, that really helped me. Like that gave me early exposure to different sectors and built up social capital for me as a young person where I had more decisions I can make across these various sectors. So who is that for you? You have friends, teachers, siblings, maybe parents or even friends' parents. Seeing people share that in the chat. Let's keep those people in mind as we continue talking that social capital with youth today. We do not emerge in the world isolated. We are deeply shaped by a variety of relationships that form us from the very first moment that we're born until we are here present on this call. So naming that and holding that in our own minds can remind us that we can have that same kind of impact on other people as well. So, what is social capital for young people specifically? Two things about a mindset that we need to take to this um, before we even define it. First thing is the ladder of abstraction. I love this. It's such a delightful drawing. This is from a professor and former Senator Samuel Hayakawa's book, Language in Action. And it's worth just naming that for Hayakawa, he's helping us try and understand where are we situated on the ladder of abstraction. At the very base of this ladder, it's basically a person, a farmer, and a cow. Okay, that's the context of this image. And I encourage you to look up the whole thing. I kind of highlighted that the very base so you can read it. The very base is the process level, the cow, known to science, ultimately consisting of atoms, electronics, and those characteristics are infinite at this level and ever changing. The process level. So that's at the very, very base. And then as you go up this ladder, things become increasingly more abstract. You go from the biological processes, and then there's the perception of the animal. And then we name the animal Bessie, and then we call that Bessie, we call that cow, livestock, farm assets, asset wealth. You see, as you like go up the ladder, you get increasingly abstracted from the sensual, practical, biological, perceptual experience of being alive. So when we are talking about research and practice, we need to know where are we on this ladder and where are we headed? Because a part of bridging research and practice is focused as deeply as possible down to the ground, getting grounded, right? We want to get as close as possible to where social capital actually happens, which is a process. It's not only a concept, it's a process. It's a relational process among people in a specific time and place. And I think that's really critical to kind of hold in our minds as we do the reflecting on the good work that we've all been doing on developing the concepts and theories. Where are we in this ladder of abstraction? And how can we make sure that we stay as grounded as possible? That's the first thing. The second thing is something that's deep into the DNA of Search Institute, strength-based mindsets. That's critical for what we do in our research on developmental assets, which was a critical part of our work in the 90s until now. And then in the past decade, a more recent focus on developmental relationships. That begins with a strength-based mindset. What do we mean by that? A problem focus to strength focus, centering myself, working on behalf of others. You can read this list yourself as you're looking at the screen. Incidental relationships to being intentional about them, transactional to be more collaborative. I think networking gets a real bad rap, in part because of the public perception that networking is all about transactional relationships. Like, what can I get out of it? That does not have to be the case, and that's certainly not the case with social capital. And if we approach it as something of possibility, as something as like looking for the strengths, the mutual experiences that we share with one another, and cast a vision for a future where young people are thriving, that's a different approach than focusing on problems or focusing on what can I get out of something, that kind of scarcity mindset. When we start out instead of from a problem focused of like, oh no, social capital is missing from these young people to, a strength-based approach where like, what relationships I might not even know about that my child has with a teacher or a friend's parent, or what can they bring to the relationship? What adults in my vicinity are excited about youth development that I haven't even met yet? So it's a different approach that I think helps build relational and social momentum to our work as in building social capital with young people. So those are the things we want to keep in mind with when we're talking about social capital and youth development, having that strength-based mindset. Where are we in the research to practice, like the ladder of like abstraction and practicality? Can we really identify and name it and stay grounded? And so when we have that mindset, then we can begin talking about social capital. And this definition is probably not a surprise to you. Social capital for young people is a dynamic network of relationships surrounding young people, providing resources to pursue their life goals. Worth just kind of mentioning kind of four aspects of that I think are unique to the conversation on social capital and youth is young people focus on others. We're focused on helping young people build their social capital, or maybe we are building social capital as adults, but it's still on behalf of the young people that we're serving and helping them thrive. That network of connections, there's three unique relationships there. There's youth to youth, the peer-to-peer relationship. There's youth to adult, that particular relationship we've done a lot of research on, a lot of study on. And then, of course, there's adult to adult, and especially in some of the case studies we'll look at later, you'll see how adults align and work together and build social capital for youth they all serve. And then finally, goal. The goal of social capital is not to increase social capital. The goal in this context of building social capital is so that young people have more access and more opportunities so that they can thrive. I heard a lecture once where the speaker was talking about widening the surface area. I'm a very visual thinker. That has really helped me as we're weaving those different webs of relationships for young people so that they can have more opportunity and access. Can we widen the surface area so that they have more possible choices and more possible actions that they can take? And that's kind of that dynamic network of relationships that's specific to young people. Relational ecosystems. Young people live in a broad web of relationships in their lives. It's staff, peers, mentors, supervisors, family members, many others. And all those different adults, many of them are in different sectors that may not even talk to each other, may not even understand each other, probably don't even use the same language to describe their work. However, for that young person, it is their entire life. It is their entire life. A relational ecosystem for a young person, all these different sectors coming together as they navigate whatever their particular experiences are. So, what happens when we think of youth development from this ecological systems lens and from that social capital lens? We have done some research and looked at three things at Search Institute that happens. One, more relationships, more clarity. So, uh, part of the work is coordinating relationships with one another. That's critical work among adults, even if a young person isn't in a room. I was doing a talk with some educators at a middle school in St. Paul, and they mentioned that sometimes the school psychologist may not even know that the same student that they're working with is also in a particular math class and also is connected to a particular sports program. So these three separate adults have 3 points of contact with the same young person. What might happen if those adults can build relationships with one another? More relationships, you get a clearer picture of what's actually going on in the life of the young person. More relationships also lead to more resources. So this is results are presented on a 0 to 100 continuous scale. And what these are suggesting is that when you divide youth into three groups, and those are low social capital, medium social, and high social capital, you get very different outcomes. On average, those with high social capital experience progress towards their goals. They have stronger self-efficacy and are more committed to helping others in comparison to those with lower social capital. So there's the progress towards education and career goals, self-efficacy, commitment to helping others. These are only three distinct types of relational resources that a young person can experience. But what we have seen very clearly is that the more connections and the larger the web of relationships the young people are situated within, the greater access they have to these relational resources. So more relationships, more clarity, and more resources. And then third, more relationships, more mobility. This is from some research that I was pulling together with some colleagues. We'll look at one of their case studies in a little bit at Genesis Works. Uh, and we have found that in this research shared by Raj Chetty and the Opportunity Insights team back in 2022, cross-class connections are the single strongest predictor of upward mobility for young people in the US. So the single strongest predictor, cross-class connections, as in young people from a more impoverished or disadvantaged neighborhood, connecting from people in other neighborhoods, and that connection leads to economic mobility. These are bridging ties that provide access to new information, referrals for job, aspirations that may not even exist within their home communities. So there is an increase in clarity and resources and mobility. So those are the three things that we have been looking at recently. Okay, so what kinds of relationships then? We're talking about weaving a web of relationships. What is the particular quality of those relationships that can really build momentum as young people's webs of relationships build out? And that's our research on developmental relationships. So, developmental relationships are those close connections through which young people discover who they are, they gain abilities to shape their own lives, and they learn how to interact with and contribute to the world around them. So, these connections are five specific elements that we have distilled down a lot of research into to kind of name that if adults working with young people are able to provide these five elements, young people are more effective, more potential to thrive, express care, challenge growth, provide support, share power, and expand possibilities. I'm sure you, as you hear those actions, you might recognize or consider examples that are coming to mind in your own work or in your own families. Expressing care, challenging growth, providing support, sharing power, and expanding possibilities. If many adults working together, working with young people, can build relationships based on these five primary actions, we will see thriving indicators increase over time. I can't go into a ton of research here. We could go and this has been a 10-year long project or longer on developmental relationships. So if you want to learn more, really recommend going to searchinstitute.org. And we have tons of workshops on this topic, and you can really go deep here. But what does this mean, not just in the dyadic, but the ecosystem? That's the point for our talk today. We we really need to keep in mind that it is not any one adult's responsibility to build developmental relationships effectively with every single young person in their life. And that each adult provides different kinds of relational resources based on their own sector, based on their own personalities, based on their own relationship with that young person. So one example here for the young person here in the middle, you might have a close friend or older mentor who's expressing care to them, a coach that's sharing power as the young person is playing basketball, and the coach like asks them like, what do you want to practice today? An imam expanding possibilities, maybe connecting this young person to another relationship in another sector they haven't even thought of, and a parent providing support. So you kind of see how if we can surround young people with enough adult to youth relationships that are focused and aligned on these core actions of developmental relationships, that will help them thrive. And specifically, those relational resources that is kind of being passed among these different links and connections in these kind of relational webs. There's access to people, spaces, experiences, opportunities. Thinking of expanding possibilities as that core action of developmental relationships. It could be a teacher inviting a friend who works for NASA and inviting them into their science class so that their friend can talk to the class and expand the possibility of the students in the class like, oh, I could be a NASA scientist. Or it could even be literally taking young people on to a field trip to a museum based on a connection you have with a director of public engagement or things like that. Then there's the support of the emotional, the motivational support, the practical support that literally comes as more possible relationships are available for a young person to leverage. And then the empowerment, the advocacy, and encouragement, and identity development as young people encounter different adults and youth and peers in all these different sectors, kind of becoming a well-rounded person. A quote that has come to mind as we're talking about these resources is this one from the book Power Paradox: How We Gain and Lose Influence. You know, when you could almost switch out the word power and social capital here, they are kind of similar. But what I like about this, well, I'll share the quote. So, power is our capacity to make a difference in the world, particularly by influencing the choices and actions of others. Dr. Keltner, who is a psychologist and director of the Berkeley Social Interaction Lab, wrote this excellent book that looks at power as a social flow instead of something that needs to be feared or something that we kind of almost often associate with aggression or coercion. That power is more of a continuum, a social continuum, that we all have different levels of power depending on where we're situated in different institutional contexts. So, how can we work together to first, like personally, how can I understand my own social situatedness? What power do I have? How can I leverage that on behalf of others? And how can I help myself and the young people I work with to more accurately see these kind of social and relational layers of institutional life? These things often kind of they fuse and fold together in complex ways, right? So that's I recommend that book to you if you're interested in kind of looking more about power specifically. But that just seemed like something worth sharing with you. Also, talking about this kind of ecosystem and web of relationships for young people. So we've kind of defined social capital and relationships to youth. Let's talk something specifically practical. And let's talk about mapping relational ecosystems. So at Search Institute, we kind of stand in research and stand in practice, a foot on each side, and we try and come up with ways and to help make the research as practical as possible to help people who are direct service providers or leaders who work with organizations. And mapping your own relational ecosystem is a surprisingly simple thing to do and critical as we're thinking about how to develop the social capital of young people that we work with or are in our own lives. If we can't um, if we can't map it out, we can't name it, then we can't be strategic, right? So I remember years ago, a colleague of mine in grad school, I went to his office and he had on his whiteboard. It looked like some kind of a football play or something. And he had all the different names of staff and different kinds of relationships and like lines and things. And he was trying to understand like how does power flow through this organization? Who makes decisions? It's not always the people with the most influence are not always the same people who publicly seem to be the one who are making the decisions. So all those like social dynamics that are at play within like the living, breathing ecosystem of a graduate school. And I just remember standing there staring at that and going like, this is so helpful. Like I wish I'd thought about this before instead of just kind of like wander through my job at the time without any awareness of the kind of social and political dynamics around me. It can feel kind of icky if you go too far in that mindset of like, how can I use this for myself? But remember that strength-based mindset. We're trying to be strategic because we care, right? And relationships deserve strategic thinking. They deserve strategic thinking. We live in social contexts that shape our work and that shape young people before they even enter a program or we're working with them directly. And we can be just as strategic and intentional as any sports playbook. And if we want to be intentional about building relationships, whether it's with youth or with other staff, if you're a manager or other adults in general, if we want to be intentional about that and intentional about creating those weak ties or strong ties and intentional about understanding the relational resources that are flowing among the kind of the relational ecosystem, that starts by counting the players on the field. That starts by looking what's here, what's present. We can be, when we have that kind of strategy, we can be more effective when we know the players in the field. We can be more effective when we know who do we know? What relationships are we embedded in where we can work together on behalf of the people that we're wanting to help, whether it's youth or otherwise. So again, in youth development, it's so easy to think in that dyadic relationship, just the one-to-one, but this ecosystem thinking doesn't just happen, and institutions are made up of people. And the more we understand and map out these social layers, the more we can get things done, and the more effective we can be, the more people we can discover who are also excited to work with us. It's just a layer of intentionality that builds momentum in the long term. And then last, it's getting specific, helps us focus on where we can actually make an impact. There's another great exercise which I really recommend you kind of look up, the circles of influence, or you just kind of name like where am I situated in my life, in my work, where I can actually make real positive change. One of the most demotivating things in our lives right now, I don't know if you feel this way, I do, is just the flood of really painful and overwhelming national and international news, whether it's from social media or from the radio or podcast or TV or whatever, just flooding in, often at a place I don't live with people I don't know. Now, it doesn't mean you don't want to know about those things. It is critical, being citizens of the world today, that we do. But that circle of influence is like, okay, where can I actually make change? Like, what relationships can I actually build that affects real people in a real place around me? So that kind of specificity can really help when you're mapping out relationships. And just as a side note, we will look at like some specific activities on mapping them out, what that might look like. So what are the benefits of doing that? There's increasing awareness. So like you see clearly who supports you and how they support you. You see clearly who supports the young people you work with and how it supports them. You can identify gaps like, whoa, okay, like this student is like kind of falling through the cracks here. And it looks like we might be able to help them if we connect them with this particular adult because they seem to be really interested in choir. Okay. Do we know anyone who is like an assistant of the choir director who can build a relationship with this young person? So it helps you identify gaps, improves communication among adults so you kind of know who's getting what kind of support, helps you strengthen relationships and being intentional about your own network, and then like building reciprocity, like learning where you can support others. This isn't just about ourselves and about young people, it's also about the whole larger community. And we don't use the word community a lot so far talking about social capital in this presentation, but that's another way to talk about what this is. It's, can we build up a thriving community where adults know each other and know the names of every young people and can work together in collaborative teamwork style to build up all those young people? It is possible. We can do that. And it is happening in places all over the US and around the world. Can we name it? Can we write it down? Can we look at it? Can we be strategic? Because relationships and the young people to whom we relate deserve that kind of strategic thinking. So when we are working directly with direct service providers, we will give them a relational mapping exercise that looks kind of like this. And you can do this yourself. All I got to do is draw pizza slices, really. You just draw the three concentric circles and then, top to down bisect and then bisect two other times. You can do as many as you want. Too many more might be a little overwhelming. But the point of this version of the relational mapping exercise is to help you identify in the center the different sectors. So you have community, work, school, family, friends. That second layer, you kind of identify, name people. So who are the actual people in these places that I know? And that outer layer is, what is the relational resource or action? What is the relational resource or action that they may be able to help me with as we are working together to build relationships with young people that help young people thrive? This is a really effective thing that you can do If you work with young people or if you work with staff where this would be useful information, like to give it to them and have them fill it out and then bring that back to you, and then you can talk about it together. Because remember this is not a one-way street when we're talking about relationship building. Like youth have a voice, even though I'm the one doing all the talking right now. Like youth have a voice and should be expressing their own interest and developing their own agency. So we really recommend when we do this activity, like take it to your young people, let them fill it out. You might be really surprised to discover the kinds of relationships and sectors that young people feel that they have access to. That can lead to new insights, could lead to new collaborations, that can lead to who knows what. So that kind of is exciting to think about. So remember, like that social layer of institutions doesn't play by institutional rules. It really doesn't. And for me, that's really interesting and exciting to think about. And one of the strategies that kind of gets my own gears turning a lot. What's coming to mind visually for me is I don't know if you've heard of desire lines or desire paths. Desire lines are what happens in architecture and in place-based design where you have one idea, like this is where the sidewalk's going to go, like at a college campus. But then like college students are going like, well, I'm going to go this way because this is the way that's closest to the cafeteria, not walking over this way and taking a hard left. So I'm going to go this way. And so what happens is over time, you have the intentional path that is planned, but then you have these connections between points to A and points B that emerge out of human beings being in the world. I think that's a great metaphor for thinking about social capital because it's not just like an official thing. Sometimes it's a very unofficial thing. It can be a very unexpected thing. Some examples that come to mind is like, okay, let's say that your daughter is going to a college and your brother is a dean of the college. Okay, well, that means her uncle is the dean of the college. Like there are connections there that the social capital that's built there naturally through a familial tie that other people don't have access to. So is there a way to be intentional about that? And not just on the sake of the daughter, but to help other, maybe daughter's friends or something, you know? Another example that comes to mind, sometimes I'll watch some different reality TV shows. One of them is a or a New York City realty show. And there is this realtor on the show. She calls herself the Queen of Brooklyn. And I am so fascinated by this because she got her start owning a nail salon. And then for 10 years, she painted nails and built up the most massive database of real powerful connections with real women and men in the Brooklyn area. And then she's like, you know what? I really like real estate. And she gets into real estate and she has this entire network of people. So, you know, on a sheet of paper, like what does a nail salon have to do with real estate? It doesn't look like much on the surface, but when you think through the lens of social capital and building up of networks of relationships and kind of those relational resources that flow, that makes perfect sense. An example from my own life, I think of in grad school where there was a celebrity. I was in grad school in Los Angeles, and there was a celebrity who was just on campus, like often, hanging out, drinking coffee. And we became friends with this person, and it was totally random on the surface. But then you realize that, oh, this celebrity is really close friends with the director of marketing and really loves being on campus. And you get the backstory and you see like, oh, okay. So that's kind of where this desire lines that I was bringing up. So what what stands out to you about your network? You know, where are the sectors that you most have the most impact in? What sector are you in? What kinds of support do these people offer to young people? It might not be on the surface what it looks like. A family member could be in a work environment that could lead to social capital building in all sorts of ways. So thinking that kind of how socializing and social relationships kind of flow and kind of they kind of break out the institutional bounds that we try and put on them sometimes, right? And then how might a young person's life be different if we can leverage these networks in more effective ways? So, you might have a version of this already that looks completely different. Great. I hope that you take this little activity, the concentric circles, try it out, adapt it, find a new model or shape that is more effective to the work that you're doing. At the end of the day, the point is that relationships, we can be strategic about them across sectors in the entire ecosystem so that young people can thrive. So let's look at building connections. Let's look at, in fact, I'm going to share some research that's been really helpful for me, kind of to orient to how social capital building happens with young people. And then we'll look at some case studies. Then we'll wrap up the kind of one-way presentation, and then we'll open up for conversation. I'm really looking forward to the questions that you have. So you have the map. Now what? What do you do with that kind of information? Well, the first thing that's just really helpful and to think about is that when we're talking about mobilizing social capital with young people, that can happen in four different ways. So this is adapted from Mario Small's framework in personal networks. And we had one of our summer scholars, Dr. Brian Lightfoot. He wrote a blog post about this called Four Ways Youth Social Capital is Mobilized. You have X and Y axis, you have active and passive, adult driven, youth driven. So let's go through these quadrants. So if you think of adult driven, this is hard to say, adult driven mobilization of social capital for young people to help them thrive. Not something you'd say over a cup of tea or something, but that is a space where what can an adult do? Maybe we respond to what we hear a young person say and offer to help if the youth want it. So if you're in a conversation with a young person and they're needing some support, and oh, that actually reminds me, I actually know someone that could help them. That's an example of kind of this quadrant. But it's not the only way, right? We can be proactive in adult-driven social capital mobilization. We can reflect on how we help and actively build social capital on behalf of young people. Who do we know that that if, might be excited to give a young person a tour of their office? Maybe you know someone. Maybe you're a friend of mine who knows someone who works at Target Corporation, which is one of the many uh, Fortune 500 corporations here in the Twin Cities, like massive. Like there's anonymity when you get to a size that big. But a friend knows someone who knows someone there, and then can person, and then maybe I'll discover that person has three kids and they love thinking about young people and supporting them. And so then, the connections just kind of flow that way, right? Again, from that mindset of possibility, the mindset of shared vision, not transactional, not what can you get from me or what can I get for myself. Then there's the other quadrant where young people themselves, they might just struggle and discover an adult that might be able to help just by happenstance. And that certainly happened in my own life. In a real low point in grad school, it was a happenstance conversation with a staff member in an academic office who helped me get out of classes like halfway through the semester. Totally unplanned, not at all what I was hoping. Not, I didn't even know I could ask for it. It's a real gift. So that can happen, but we want to be active. And we want youth to be active too. So youth can reflect on their needs and seek out the right adults. And that's where, it's useful to have youth themselves do relationship mapping. So when we're building connections, so that again, please use that. I'll have my email up at the end of this presentation if you would like access to that blog post. I'm happy to send it your way. But this has been helpful because when we're talking about building social capital on behalf of others, sometimes I'm the one building the social capital. Sometimes the other person I'm helping is building social capital. And that can get really murky if we're not really clear on like who's driving right now, right? So that was a very useful framework for me, and I hope that is for you. So building connections, there's a lot of challenges that we might face. There's so many articles on the Institute of Social Capital's website. My goodness, what a wealth of articles in preparation for this meeting. I was looking at one that Tristan wrote on social norms and social sanctions. Sometimes the challenge might be norms we don't understand, or sanctions that kind of like, or were disciplined for like, you've reached out, you've emailed someone in the C-suite and you shouldn't have done that, you know. So becoming aware of the norms and the sanctions, I think is very valuable. Other things that, we might have personal hangups. We're like, I don't want to bother anyone, or I don't know how to introduce myself. The youth themselves might be thinking this way, that I don't really feel confident about reaching out. I don't know what to do. Remember, with social capital, demystify, go down that ladder of abstraction. Share with a young person what a priest told me years ago in New York City, that movements start with friendship. Movements start with friendship. That's where we're starting. We're building connections with other people. And it's critical to build those connections. And it is possible to kind of work through some of these challenges to build those lasting connections. This isn't listed here, but I think another challenge we face is is that temptation to be transactional, to reach out to people because we want something, instead of that critical work of building connections before any kind of collaborative work takes place. So some strategies when you're working directly with young people, we have a list of a lot more. I'm happy to share with you if you want to reach out to me later. Some could be setting, you're helping young people build this. So setting relationship goals, help young people identify 1 to 2 people to connect with during an internship. You name the network, so you do that visual mapping exercise with young people, and then emphasize, look how many people are in your corner. And there's practicing to ask. I think this is really helpful, not just for youth, for anyone. Like role play it out, like try it out. Like if you need to request advice, or you want a meeting with someone that's a different organization, you're asking for feedback or whatever, practice it out in a safe environment where you can even as an adult like help that young person practice. And then connecting the dots. Here's one of those questions. If you remember back to development of relationships, one of those elements of sharing power. So asking the question, who do you know that might know someone who can help? Or how do you want to build social capital? What connections do you have as you're thinking about this? Those kinds of questions as you're working with young people are really critical. So let's look at 3 examples, and then we'll look at a few more things and we'll wrap up probably around time. 3 examples of organizations we've been working with. So at Search Institute, we are not direct service providers. We do not work with youth. We work with adults who work with youth. Sometimes we work with adults who work with staff who work with youth. And so the layers of impact can feel removed enough. We have to be very strategic about how can we really work together to make that impact happen where young people thrive. But we don't work with youth. We work with organizations who do. And so here are 3 examples of people that I've connected with recently in different projects. I'm personally just really inspired by their work and what they do and what they're up to. And we're kind of looking at a map and and through the lens of a social capital lens, right? The first is Genesis Works, and their mission is to provide pathways to career success for high school students in underserved communities through skill training, meaningful work experiences, and impactful relationships. They they stand in the gap between emerging adults who are looking for their first job. They build bridges between schools and families and corporations, giving young people experiences of what a corporate life is like before they reach that stage of development. So really interesting, really critical work. So you have a young person here in the middle. And then you have the relationship here on the left. You have the program coordinator and the young professional, or the program coordinator will sometimes work with 10, 15, 20 young YPs, they call them, connected in all sorts of different corporations. Okay. So that relationship, kind of a mentor relationship, one where you're in their corner, really helping them out and helping them navigate the corporation that they have been placed in. Then you have young professional cohorts. You have youth of each year, like all the youth who are involved in Genesis Works. There's a set of relationships that are emerging among peer and near peer relationships. That is critically supportive. And there's webs of there's social capital that is developing there. Like think about like if 5 years, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, let's just say 5 years from now, some of the youth who are in this program, they're in the same cohort. They really click. They support one another. They care about one another. 5 years later, they're in completely different corporations, maybe even in different cities, maybe even in different countries. But that connection might lead to some collaboration between two institutions. And there's a relationships that started in that cohort. I think that's one of the powerful impacts of like alumni organizations and things like that. So that's that kind of cohort peer relationship. So we have the adult to youth, the peer relationship, and then you have the young professional as they relate to the supervisor. The supervisor is within the corporation themselves and providing support, language, some mentoring as that young person is doing that internship in that corporation. So that young person is surrounded by all these different kinds of relationships. They're getting access to a mentor, support from friends, guidance from a supervisor doing the work as they're navigating that corporation. And at that conference recently, we were working with them to think about, well, how do we build on this good work? And specifically, like, how can we make sure that the adult supervisor and the adult program coordinator, what can we do to like really like elevate that experience so that like let's say that supervisor leaves, well then you might lose access to that corporation. So it's basically like how do we build more links and more nodes? How do we widen the surface area of the web of relationships and that kind of institutional collaboration between this nonprofit and a local corporation? A quote from one of our researchers who did a research project, a massive 3-year research project on social capital and helped usher in the youth opportunity navigator, said it this: working in partnership with youth, their families, and communities, mentors have the potential to further cultivate mentees' agency and skills at forming their own connections and mobilizing these connections and resources that result as they pursue their goals. The goal for Genesis Works is like, it's not just to be in Genesis Works, it's cultivating the social capital of that young person so that then when they leave, they then have a wider web of relationships that help them navigate their young adult lives. So, another case study, Communities in Schools. It's a really amazing organization. Just really impressed with what they do. We've been working with them on a partnership on building developmental relationships with their staff. Uh, at Communities in Schools, they help students reach their full potential. And Communities in Schools empower students to stay in school and succeed in life. They have their own model, their own image that I thought was be better to like share what they have instead of make my own here. But they have a creating a community of support model. And if you look in the site coordinator there's a young person right at the center, sitting in the chair, and the site coordinator is at one. These are kind of the steps. Um, so a site coordinator is assigned to a school, develops a plan and builds a team by building relationships with adults inside the school, even though the site coordinator doesn't work for the school. And then that site coordinator organizes local services to help that young person, whether it's food bank, health services, tutors, job shadowing, family counseling, service learning, all that stuff is integrated into basically building a web of support around that young person. And they do that over and over and over again in all sorts of schools around the country and around the US, building out those webs of support for students. This is a quote from Stanley Fish. It's kind of bringing my own English background here, but wanted to make a point about working in institutions that might not be our own. The moral is clear. The choice is never between objectivity and interpretation, but between interpretation that is unacknowledged as such and an interpretation that is aware of itself. So Stanley Fish, he talks a lot about interpretive communities, language communities. Every organization has their own way of saying things and conceiving of things. And a critical part of building social capital, especially like with communities in schools, going into a school, how does this school talk about their work? They're not going to talk about each young person as a professional. They're going to call them a student. An example is like, um, you know, think of an acronym that makes sense to you and makes sense to your colleagues. But that if a new employee comes in, you're like, well, what the heck does that mean? Like I have a list here like TTDR, COP, YPAR, E2E, cadre. These are all acronyms that make complete sense to me. because it's a part of the language that my organization uses to describe our research projects and our solutions and things like that. But they don't necessarily mean anything to you. If you Google the three C's, you have a hundred different versions, like whether it's addiction recovery or grief or workforce development. Everyone has their own three C's and they're all different. So the point that I want to make here before going to that third and final case study is that when we're building social capital across sectors, it is critical to understand how do the people that I'm talking to, how do they talk about their work? What language do they use? What is their mission, vision, values? What's their motto of the year? Just like look on their social media profile and kind of see what's common themes I'm seeing in the language they use to describe their work. That is a critical way. If we want to be more efficient in building connections, which is the real that's the baseline of building social capital is connective tissue of that kind of work. It starts by that empathetic, proactive work of understanding how do the people I'm connecting with conceive of what they do? How do they talk about what they do? What is their language community? What concepts are important to them? That kind of thinking will really pay dividends long term as you're building social capital because it signifies that you that people not only feel seen and heard, but you also are able to understand like what is the institutional machinery? How does that actually work here? And the more that we can do that kind of cognitive load early and kind of really learn all that stuff, the easier it'll be to do that relational and emotional and psychological work of making connections with others, which is at the end of the day what social capital is all about. The last one is Up Partnership, which is a really impressive group in San Antonio. And their goal is to ensure all young people across Bexar County and San Antonio area are ready for the future. And so to do that, we coordinate data, align pathways, and promote policy change that can help unlock the full potential of our young people, our communities, and our region. Y'all, they're doing it. They're doing it so well. And a big way that they're making it work is they're pulling in adults from all these different sectors. That's here in the center image here, adults who have connections to youth in their own sectors. They pull all of those adults into the same space, into communities of practice that go through, kind of align them through professional development, and then send them back out into the various sectors. So you can kind of see in these that's just three examples but kind of mapping out like how do the relationships work? And I bet you on this call or watching on YouTube, like you can map it out too, and it might look completely different. But the very act of doing that, of mapping it out, kind of thinking strategically about it, is such a critical step in being strategic long term and building social capital with and for young people. Another quote to wrap up this section. Social forces shape the development of information networks. Kind of a crunchy, abstract phrase. We're kind of high up on that abstraction ladder. But this book is, I just highly recommend it. The Social Life of Information came out 20, 30 years ago. Very prescient, very helpful now in looking at how information flows through systems and through organizations, and ultimately requires a level of socialization that information doesn't exist on its own. It has to be interpreted and translated and shared among people, among people. So this community practice, it's the sharing of information happens over a meal, right? Like I went down to San Antonio and we did a 2 day training and we had tons of conversations in the program, in the training itself, but also tons of conversations like in between moments where we're just taking a break or having a meal before having coffee. Like we can't forget staying grounded at that social level. Those relationships happen in a real place, a real time with real people, and that socializing aspect of our work is, I think, really helpful and important to be intentional about at a time when things feel increasingly fragmented and kind of drifting into greater and greater abstraction. So just a little 2 cents for you on that. So those are some examples of how people are making connections and building social capital for young people. I would be remiss to not share with you more about the Youth Opportunity Navigator, which is one of our unique tools that we've developed at Search Institute. And there's a QR code there. If you're interested, I welcome that you click around and learn more. But the Youth Opportunity Navigator started built out of 3-year social capital tools project from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And it's a data-driven tool that we use with organizations. They prepare to deliver surveys among their organization. They implement their surveys that are looking at social capital measures among the organization. They do a reflection as a group and as individuals to kind of think about what decisions do we want to make based on what we've learned, this improvement journey. And then we guide them through ways to actually make sense of it and act and translate that into work. Another thing that we have, there's a youth opportunity toolkit, which is available for free on our website, which just kind of gives a lot more background information on social capital and our approach to that topic as it relates to young people, which I invite you to take a look at as well. So, closing and next steps. What's one practical step you can take to increase the social capital of young people in your life? What's one practical step that you can take to widen the web of relationships that surround young people and help them thrive? I hope that you consider and think about that. And I welcome that you write it in the chat or write it in the comments to share with others that one practical step. This work of building social capital takes time. Youth development takes time. It's at a different time scale than just buying something off of a website, right? Um, but we can cultivate relationships that help young people thrive. We can make a difference, and we can do that together. So let's partner together. If you're interested in building youth social capital with Search Institute, would welcome conversations. My email is michaelw@searchinstitute.org, and I'll put that in the chat. And I'll make sure to share the link as well to this social capital page. I'm just going to end with this quote here from our CEO and president, Ben Holberg. It is impossible for any one adult to be all things to all youth at all times, but as a community, we can. So thank you so much for being on this call and for spending some time out of your Wednesday to think more about social capital as it relates to helping young people grow. And I hope that you found something useful to help you in your own work. And so with that, I'll pass it on to Tristan.
Great. Thanks very much, Michael. Fascinating presentation and really insightful. Really pleasure to listen to you speaking about the work of the Search Institute. So we have some time for some questions and discussion. So feel free to either post in the chat. When I call upon you, if you can unmute yourself to ask your own question. But of course, if you're not in a position to do so for any reason, you don't want to speak or you're in a noisy environment, just let me know in the chat and I'll happily read out the question on your behalf. And of course, you can also raise your hand within Zoom as well, which you'll find under the React button. So, Michael, I might start with the first question while we're waiting to see if other people have questions they'd like to ask or topic they'd like to pose. And it's a bit of a philosophical one, I suppose, because the social capital is associated with the capital ideology of individual benefit and perhaps even exploitation and these kinds of things that sometimes people object to. And when we talk about being strategic in the way in which we go about building and using social relationships, what we probably really mean is that we're encouraging people to be social, to actually build those relationships and to actually communicate and engage with each other and help each other and so forth. And so it is strategic, but by emphasizing strategic, we're almost reinforcing that individualism. We're almost saying to people, hey, look, the benefit that you can get for yourself is what you should be focusing on here. That's the number one driver of your behavior is the benefit you can receive for yourself. Rather than, of course, that being social and helping others is also another benefit that comes from social capital, effectively. And so,
Mhm.
do you see a tension in the way that we use terms like capital and strategic, and the way in which we talk about it, and whether or not that is the best way to go about it? Like, should we be trying to emphasize the collective benefits and the social benefits for the individual, not just the instrumental benefits that they receive as a result of social relationships? And how do we kind of try and reconcile those tensions?
Oh, Tristan, I wish we could go to a bar and have a pint and talk about this together for a couple hours because it's so fascinating, right? Because what I hear in your question is is that desire to really name that tension and really help people see the collective and social benefits. I hear that in what your question is, and I see it in the work you have in your articles on your own and the website. Um, yeah, that is one of the fundamental tensions. I didn't get into this a lot but Lakoff's book, The Metaphors We Live By. I think is really, really helpful in thinking about metaphors. Any metaphor both provides access to insight and also creates its own blind spots. That's true regardless of the metaphor. So we could like, oh, well, let's change the metaphor. Like at Search Institute, we talk a lot about cultivation. We talk about gardens and use gardening metaphors and ecology and trees and all this kind of stuff to talk about developing relationships with adults. But there are problems there too. I think so. I think the two things I would say, and I'm curious what you would say too. Two things. One is make sure to name what is implicit within a metaphor. Like use a metaphor and then name it from the very beginning. And then the second thing I would say is invite people we're talking to, like what metaphors work for you, what helps you. I was struggling with that too in preparing for the calls. Like, oh, capital, social capital, this. If we're not careful, it can lead to the assumptions of the give and take of economic exchange.
Right.
There's aspects of that that's useful, but the real thing is we just don't want that to shape our imaginations uncritically. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is a big question, of course. I think I've been exploring this, and if we consider how these individual actions that benefit people come about through social relationships, I can I can benefit if you make a social introduction that introduces me to somebody of power or that gives me some sort of opportunity. So the activation is effectively occurring in you because you're the one who's making the social introduction, and I receive instrumental benefits as a result of that. And so, why are you making that social introduction to me? You're not the one who's personally benefiting. I mean, maybe you could say, well, if I introduce you to that person, then maybe you'll do something for me later and you can find an instrumental benefit for you. But what
Mhm.
probably drives most people's helping, sharing, caring type behaviors is actually the satisfaction of their own social needs, that they feel good when they help somebody, that they
Right.
feel belonging or they feel internal validation or they feel something that satisfies their social needs. And so we don't tend to think and talk about that in the context of social capital at all. We talk about the instrumental benefits that come from social relationships, but the real
Mhm.
activation of the capital is occurring to satisfy social needs. And I think
Mhm.
that's maybe a way that we can start to think about these other processes that actually drive social capital formation and activation that can move us a little bit away from that exploitive kind of way of thinking about capital. That that I'm not exploiting you in order to get what I want. You're actually satisfying your social needs in order to give me what I want.
Yes, and I think being honest about like naming it, being honest about it, and being careful that it's just not some implicit hidden motive or something. You know, there's a great book called Talk to the Elephant. Um, I really highly recommend this person. She's an excellent author and learning and development strategist, Julie Dirksen. And her books, Talk to Elephant is like designing learning for behavior change, and she has other books as well. And it's looking at motivation, like what are people motivated by? Status seeking motivations exist, you know. Uh, Desires for self-protection and safety, those are motivations that exist. And we'd be remiss to not just name that. So how can we name them while also not being entrapped by them? And whether that entrapment is like ignoring them so that they influence us anyway, or negatively take advantage of those motivations.
Yeah. I think it's a big topic and we can talk a lot more about it, but I think the discussion about active versus passive, it maybe highlights this a little bit more that, Mario Small focused on the mobilization being active or passive, but he wasn't so focused on the creation. being active or passive. And I think it's very useful to think about young people, especially his approach to social capital in general, as being active or passive, not just the mobilization, not because that ends up feeling a little bit on the exploitive kind of trying to get instrumental benefit out of it. And that wasn't Mario's intention at all. He was working on the mobilization side, but thinking about that intentionality that you talked about, that if we are active in our intentionality about building relationships, creating them, and about fulfilling social needs through those relationships, then we can produce very different kinds of outcomes for our young people compared to what most people do, which is what you said. Most people right now are completely passive about it. They're not even aware of the benefits and importance of social relationships in terms of meeting social needs, of course, like they're very disconnected from those ideas, but they're also disconnected from the ideas that relationships can provide the instrumental benefits as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah,
there's
that's well
a
put.
lot there we could get into, I'm sure.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Should
I
we,
see.
unless you have a comment on that, should we could go to Jacinda?
Jacinda.
Thank you, Michael. That was such a fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed it, and it's very all of this is very close to my heart because I um, have worked with young people who leave out of home care or state care, and often their relationships are not good at all, very, very poor, and they've suffered a lot of trauma, relational trauma, essentially. So this is really, really interesting. And just hearing you and Tristan talk was really interesting because one of the things that I've learned in my research and in my practice is with young people is to show how they naturally reciprocate. So it's really interesting about, we talk about being passive or being active. Often when we work with young people, we can help them identify what they do for other people as well, that people aren't, or adults aren't always doing for them, that I've
Mhm.
pointed out for them the things that they do for other people as well, which has been really helpful for them to actually see themselves as active participants in the community because often they don't see themselves that way. Um, one of my so to me, that's not just looking at them socially. That's actually really good for them emotionally and psychologically as well. And you've actually mentioned that about social capital, that it's actually very good for development and emotional development and psychological development of people. But what I'm really interested in what you're saying, or one of the other things that I'm interested in, is the idea, you didn't quite put it this way, but the idea of bypassing institutional rules, or I think institutional lens or the institutional rules doesn't actually come into play as much with the building of social capital. And often, the work that I do, of course, I'm working in an institution, and there's all these rules, and there's costs, and there's funding cuts. So I'm just wondering, and you've given some really, really good models, but often when people come in and young people come in and see us, they're in a crisis. So we've often
Mm.
got to actually work with that. And the social relationships actually fall in priority. I'm just wondering if you have any ideas of how we can um, change the way that we do this sort of work. It's very much what we call casework or support work. But I think what you're talking about is something that is building their community around them. So, do you have any thoughts on that type of work?
You know, is it Jacinta? Is that how you?
Yeah, yes, yes.
Well, one, I just like admire the work that you're doing, and like, I spend most days like, working on slide decks and writing papers and working on stuff for Research Institute, and we're helping do. We're not doing this kind of work that, there's so much emotional cost and so much intensity to it, and a strong desire to help people in crisis. And yeah, someone in crisis now, like, hey, you know what's going to help you if you could just build your social capital. Like, no, like this, that's not what. Um, I think of there's this organization that kind of lodged in the back of my head that years and years ago, I wrote a story on when I was working in marketing in higher education called Alongsiders. And their whole thing is just being with young people, or living alongside them through
Mm,
anything. And that's coming to mind for me right now, not because it's an answer, because I don't know the answer. I would be curious what other people who are doing similar to work in your region, what ideas might they have? But I do know that like living alongside and committing to young people and staying with them through crisis is like it's such a gift, you know. I wish I had more to share. I don't know. Do you have a follow-up question or anything? I know Abdul has a hand too, but
no, I think you're right. I think in the end, that's what we do. However, it's trying to break that cycle of crisis because I think eventually what's going to be most helpful is everything that you've actually said is
yes.
is that's what's going to prevent the crises in the future. And often we teach workers relational work, not transactional work. But often I think when they go out there, they find it really, really difficult because they actually, see people in crisis, and often institutions are built around transactions and not building relationships. So it's very can be very disheartening. But I'll continue to think about it. I will probably will be in contact with you. I think your work
Oh,
is
thanks.
very, very good.
And I'll also add too, burnout is like so prevalent, so possible. U.S. nonprofit space is in a lot of crisis right now too. And I think the circle of influence is also two practical things. Circle of influence, very, very helpful. What can I actually change? I have overextended myself in times because I want something to change and be different and
Mm,
exhausted myself.
mm,
So I've had to like learn how to let go of that and think more strategically about where am I actually situated, what can I actually do. And the other thing is like listening to Motown and good music. That has been such a key part of my work the past year that has stoked some hope and encouragement and optimism from me
mm.
through the midst of crises. But
Thank
I
you.
think Michael's got a really great sort of framework, I suppose, for how like the various things you can do, and but if we take a step back and we think about, well, what does building social capital mean? What does that look like? Because we all agree it's about social relationships. It's about how we're connected. And we form those connections through conversation, through communication with each other. But not just any form of interaction or communication, not any kind of talking, because if we're not listening, we're thinking about ourselves, we're not paying attention, we're being disrespectful, that's clearly not going to create connection. So it's very certain types of communication is what's going to build connection. And then we do that intentionally, strategically, if you like, using these kinds of words. We do that using effectively things like social technologies. We can develop ways of doing that that can be much more effective. And particularly on the listening, the caring, the paying attention side, the like a lot of the sort of catchphrases that circulate around social capital is things like humanizing humans, reconnecting with our humanity, reconnecting with the importance and value of social relationships. These kinds of ways of just getting back in touch with the emotions and the connection and what it means to actually have a relationship with somebody. Quite often is we need to create the possibility for that to occur in the context within which we work. And so that's where Michael's sort of framework again. I'm not sure if that's quite the right term, but like he's got all of the ideas about how that can actually happen and putting those into practice. Then, of course, it's easier said than done, but that then perhaps provides the pathway.
Mm.
hmm, easier said than done, ongoing work. Absolutely. Abdul, thank you so much for your patience. I'm very curious what you would like to offer. May have stepped away.
Abdul Human, are you there? Perhaps we can go to the question in the chat and we'll come back to Abdul. So
Yeah.
Taylor's in a loud environment. So he asks, Raj Chetty's research shows that cross-class connections are the strongest predictor of economic mobility. In your work, you have seen communities successfully create these bridging connections across socioeconomic lines. What strategies and practices made that work?
So I would say,
Yeah.
thank you for the question.
Okay. Sorry. Can I come in with my question?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Taylor, I'll share a link in just one second. Yes, Abdul?
All right. All right. Thank you so much, Michael, for the wonderful presentation. It's very insightful and very thought provoking. And I think we need to look through this presentation very well. And as someone working with the youth and smallholder farmers in Ghana, precisely Tamale, the northern part of Ghana, it's something that one is applying, and it's just like you are reading my mind, or your research is reading my work to other people across the globe. And it's
Mhm.
something that I want to encourage all of us to take it up serious. Social capital is a big asset that helps a lot, and its benefits are enormous. Through social capital, we are leveraging on expertise across the world. You sit in one part of the globe and you access information within the twinkle of an eye. And it's
Mhm.
also zeroing down the globe to one universe, or one in an ecosystem that once you leverage on it or you take it up serious, you're going to benefit a lot. A clear classical example is my current project that I'm working on with smallholder farmers and women in agro processing, whereby my outfit is taking them through on how they can leverage on the waste that they are producing from their agro waste, how they
Mhm.
can turn it to monetize it. So monetizing it is linking them to a lot of opportunities. One,
Mhm.
saving the environment. Two, improving on their health and well-being. And three, generating revenue from that. And it's as a result of my social capital that I had that collaboration with Mida Grow 2. It's a Canadian organization which is running that initiative in the northern part of Ghana. So I
Mhm.
want to thank Trishan and all of us here for making time to be part of this novel platform. And I want to encourage all of us, let us try as much as we can to be open to each other and be accommodating, because the essence of us having the social capital movement growing leverage on us to be accommodating and be there for each other. Through that, we'll be able to get more people on board, and the message will trickle down to the down and both the grassroots and also with the stakeholders. I mean, governments and other institutions. And I want to encourage us to see how best we can get the institutional, the educational systems to buy into this concept, because it's something which is helping a lot. And there's a need for us to advocate seriously for educational institutions to see how best they can inculcate this part of their teaching models. So thank you so much, Michael, for the wonderful work that you are doing. We appreciate it a lot. Thank you so much to everyone for making time to be part of this wonderful meeting. And I hope to see all of you in Dubai for the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Abdul. Like, it's so inspiring. I love this about Zoom. Like, you're doing such amazing work in Ghana, and then I'm here in Minneapolis, and Tristan is Tristan. How do you say your? Did I mispronounce your name?
I know either one's fine.
Okay. uh, Tristan is in Australia. Like we're all over, right? We're all over this small but mighty group on this Zoom call, building opportunities for people in our own spaces that only in ways that we could. So thank you for sharing that, Abdul. And um, the last thing worth mentioning, or the question that you had, Taylor did want to mention that we do have stories of impact that we recently published on our website. We can kind of see, there it is. You can see different examples of organizations and their work. No specific ones coming to mind right now. The economic mobility component is new to me, but that is work that we were doing with Genesis Works. So I would focus in on looking at Genesis Works and go from there.
There was one other comment in the chat. I just wanted to bring everyone up to speed with. I think it's Jay Un. Feel free to correct my pronunciation of your name, of course. They say that they've also been uncomfortable with the term social capital for the reasons that I outlined earlier, but feel that distinguishing social and personal benefits reflects a Western individualistic understanding of personhood. This can differ in African or indigenous understandings of personhood and relational being, as expressed in the saying, I am because we are in African philosophy. And I commented on that saying, completely agree that from the perspective of many traditional cultures, the concept of social capital is almost nonsensical, as the saying reflects. But in many modern cultures, it is appealing because it highlights the lack of social connection and the lack of and that but at the same time, as we've been talking about, we can also potentially reinforce the same if we're not careful about the way in which we actually think about social capital as well.
Mhm. That's exactly right. I actually I thought about reading this poem to you all, but um, one of the great American poet, Walt Whitman, has this poem, A Noiseless Patient Spider, where he talks about building bridges in a vast emptiness that he personally is building one thread at a time. Deeply individualistic, deeply individualistic, that it's the source of connections is coming from himself and not from the community in which he's a part. So yes, just a poem there to kind of emphasize exactly what you're sharing.
So we've got about 2 minutes left. So if anybody has any final questions or thoughts you'd like to share, you need to get in really quickly. But while we're waiting to see if anything comes up, Michael, is there anything that like to share as kind of final thoughts?
You know, we've been doing more systems level work at Search Institute recently, and that's been really interesting and compelling work. And I think, it's just worth keeping in mind, like change is possible. And with committed effort over time, things can grow. We can grow social capital in our communities. It does take time, but it can happen. And so I just encourage everyone to, stay persistent, stay resilient, stay hopeful, and keep moving forward.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks so much, Michael, on behalf of all the participants and the association as well. We really appreciate the time you've taken to give this webinar. Our final webinar of the year is next week, and it's actually one of the people you referenced in your presentation. Ashley Boat is going to be giving a presentation along with Heather Popperad as well. So tune in on our website for that. Check out the details, and hopefully everyone can join us for that one. Thanks again, Michael. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here.